The stagecoach rattled to a stop in a cloud of dust as Wilhelmina Kane clutched her small valise with trembling hands. The journey west had been long and arduous, but hope had sustained her through every bone-jarring mile. Hope that had now turned to ash as her eyes scanned the empty platform of the Silverwater Springs station. Not a single soul waited to greet her, no prospective husband, no representative, no one. April 1876 had promised new beginnings when she had answered the advertisement in the Chicago Tribune. Established rancher seeks bride of good character and sturdy constitution. Passage paid. After exchanging 3 letters with Mr. Thomas Wright, she had sold her few possessions, bid farewell to her position as a seamstress, and boarded the train west. Now she stood alone as the last passenger to disembark, the driver already unloading her trunk with impatient movements. "This is Silverwater Springs, miss," the driver announced gruffly. "Last stop." Wilhelmina nodded, her throat too tight for words. The small frontier town sprawled before her, a single dusty street lined with wooden buildings, some 2 stories high with false fronts that made them appear grander than they were. A saloon, a general store, what appeared to be a blacksmith shop, and a handful of other establishments made up the heart of what was to be her new home. "I was to be met," she finally managed, her voice small against the vastness of the open sky, "by Mr. Thomas Wright." The driver shrugged, already climbing back onto his seat. "Can't help you there, miss. You might try the sheriff's office yonder if you're expecting someone who didn't show." With that, he snapped the reins and the stagecoach pulled away, leaving her standing beside her trunk, the late afternoon sun bearing down on her bonnet. Wilhelmina blinked back tears, determined not to give in to despair. 22 years of life had taught her that crying solved nothing. She was about to gather her courage and head toward the sheriff's office when she felt eyes on her. Turning slightly, she saw a man watching her from the boardwalk outside the general store. Tall and broad-shouldered, he wore the practical attire of a working cowboy, denim trousers, a faded blue shirt, and a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his features. Unlike the other townsfolk who glanced at her with mere curiosity before going about their business, his gaze was steady and assessing. After a moment, he pushed off from the post he'd been leaning against and strode toward her with purposeful steps. Wilhelmina stiffened, uncertain whether to welcome his approach or be wary of it. "Pardon me, madam," he said as he drew near, his voice a pleasant baritone with the soft drawl of the frontier. "You appear to be waiting on someone who hasn't shown." "Yes," she admitted, lifting her chin. "I'm to meet Mr. Thomas Wright. I'm his, that is to say, we had an arrangement." Understanding dawned in the man's eyes, a striking blue beneath the shadow of his hat brim. "Mail order bride?" he asked directly, though without judgment. Her cheeks warmed, but she nodded. There was no sense in pretense. "Yes, we corresponded for 2 months. He was to meet me today." The cowboy's expression darkened. He removed his hat, revealing thick chestnut hair and a face weathered by sun and wind, but handsome in a rugged way. He was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps no more than 30. "Madam, I regret to inform you that Thomas Wright passed away 3 weeks ago. Influenza swept through the South Valley, took him and his mother both." The blood drained from Wilhelmina's face. "Dead?" The word barely escaped her lips. "But I received no word. His last letter confirmed today's arrival." "Mail service can be unreliable out here," the stranger said, his tone softening, "and with no family left to handle his affairs." He trailed off, the implication clear. Wilhelmina swayed slightly, the full weight of her situation crashing down upon her. She was alone in a strange town, with limited funds and no prospects. The return fare to Chicago would consume most of what little money she had, and even if she could afford it, there was nothing left for her there. No job, no lodgings, no family. The stranger must have read the distress on her face, for he quickly set his hat back on his head and stepped closer. "I'm Preston Reed," he introduced himself, offering a calloused hand. "I ranch north of town. Knew Thomas somewhat good man, kept to himself mostly." Wilhelmina took his hand briefly. "Wilhelmina Kane. I'm pleased to make your acquaintance, Mr. Reed, despite the circumstances." Preston nodded, glancing at her trunk and then back to her face. "Do you have somewhere to stay, Miss Kane, or funds to return east?" She squared her shoulders, unwilling to appear completely helpless. I have some money, though not enough for immediate return passage. I suppose I'll need to seek employment here She faltered, unsure how to finish that sentence. Preston looked at her thoughtfully, then made a decision. First things first, you need lodging. Mrs. Hoffman runs the boarding house just down the street. Good woman, fair prices. He bent to lift her trunk with ease. If you'll allow me? Relief washed over Wilhelmina. That's very kind, Mr. Reed. Thank you. As they walked side by side down the dusty main street, she stole glances at her unexpected benefactor. There was something reassuring in his steady gait and straightforward manner. Have you lived in Silverwater Springs long, Mr. Reed? She asked, seeking to focus on something beyond her predicament. Born and raised in the territory, he replied. My father staked his claim here in '52. I took over the ranch when he passed 5 years ago. I'm sorry for your loss. Preston nodded acknowledgement. Life out here takes as much as it gives, Miss Kane. He paused, then added more gently, but it does give. There's a freedom and beauty to this land that gets into your blood. They approached a neat 2-story structure with a small sign reading, Hoffman Boarding House. Before they reached the door, Preston stopped and turned to her, his expression serious. Miss Kane, I want you to know something. You won't stand here alone again. Silverwater Springs is a good community. We look after our own, and while you're here, that includes you. Something in the quiet intensity of his words touched her deeply. For the first time since discovering Thomas Wright's absence, Wilhelmina felt a flicker of hope. Thank you, Mr. Reed. That means more than I can express. He held her gaze for a moment longer, then nodded and continued toward the boarding house door. As he knocked, Wilhelmina found herself wondering if perhaps fate had not been so cruel after all. Mrs. Hoffman proved to be a bustling woman in her 50s, with a no-nonsense manner and keen eyes that missed nothing. After hearing Wilhelmina's situation, she immediately offered a room at a reduced rate for the first week. Gives you time to find your feet, she declared, leading them up a narrow staircase. And I can always use help with the washing and cooking if you're willing to work for part of your keep. I'm a skilled seamstress as well, Wilhelmina offered, following the woman down a narrow hallway. I worked for one of Chicago's finer establishments before coming west. Mrs. Hoffman's eyebrows rose with interest. Did you now? Well, that's something we could surely use around here. Most clothing comes ready-made from catalogs these days, but quality mending and custom work are hard to come by. The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a chest of drawers. A single window looked out over the back garden where chickens pecked among vegetable rows. It's perfect, Wilhelmina said sincerely. Thank you, Mrs. Hoffman. Preston set her trunk at the foot of the bed. I'll leave you to get settled then, he said. The general store's open until 6 if you need provisions. Actually, Mrs. Hoffman interjected, I was just about to serve supper. Nothing fancy, just stew and biscuits, but you're welcome to join us. Mr. Reed, least I can do after you helped our new boarder. Preston hesitated, looking to Wilhelmina as if seeking her approval. She nodded slightly, finding herself reluctant to see him go just yet. Much obliged, Mrs. Hoffman, he accepted. I'll just see to my horse and return shortly. After he left, Mrs. Hoffman gave Wilhelmina a knowing look. Preston Reed is one of the good ones, she said matter-of-factly. Honest as the day is long and works harder than any 2 men. Been running that ranch alone since his father died, though it's too much for one man. Has he no family? Wilhelmina asked, unpinning her hat. None living. Had a younger brother who took a bullet in a saloon dispute 2 years back. Mother passed when they were boys. Mrs. Hoffman sighed, but he keeps to himself mostly, comes to town for supplies, attends church on Sundays when weather permits. Not one for socializing much. Wilhelmina absorbed this information as she freshened up for dinner, washing the dust of travel from her face and hands in the basin provided. She changed from her traveling dress to a simpler blue cotton frock, suitable for an informal meal. As she pinned her honey-blonde hair into a more comfortable arrangement, she couldn't help but reflect on the strange turn of events. That morning, she had been full of nervous anticipation about meeting Thomas Wright, the man she had agreed to marry. Now, he was dead, and she was adrift in a frontier town with nothing but uncertainty ahead. Yet somehow the crushing weight of that reality was tempered by Preston Reed's simple promise. You won't stand here alone again. Supper was a pleasant affair, with 4 other boarders joining them at Mrs. Hoffman's large oak table, a schoolteacher, an elderly widow, a young clerk from the bank, and a traveling salesman passing through. The conversation flowed easily, with everyone curious about Wilhelmina but respectful of her circumstances. Preston spoke little, but she noticed how attentively he listened, his eyes often finding hers across the table. There was something compelling about his quiet strength, so different from the superficial charm of city men she had known. As the meal concluded, he finally addressed her directly. Miss Kane, if you're amenable, I'd like to escort you to Sheriff Daniels tomorrow morning. He was handling Wright's affairs, such as they were, and should be informed of your arrival. That would be most helpful, Mr. Reed, she replied. What time would suit you? I've business at the bank at 9. Could meet you here after, say past. That would be perfect. Thank you. He nodded, rising from his chair. Then I'll bid you all good evening. His eyes lingered on Wilhelmina for a moment. Rest well, Miss Kane. Tomorrow is a new beginning. After he left, Mrs. Hoffman enlisted Wilhelmina's help with the dishes, an arrangement she welcomed as a chance to feel useful. As they worked side by side in the kitchen, the older woman shared the latest town gossip, painting a vivid picture of Silverwater Springs and its inhabitants. Town's growing, Mrs. Hoffman noted as they dried the last of the plates. Railroad's talking about putting in a spur line next year. Brings opportunity for those with eyes to see it. What sort of opportunities do you think might exist for someone with my skills? Wilhelmina asked. Mrs. Hoffman considered this. Well now, Mrs. Thompson at the general store handles some ready-made items, but she's no seamstress. Doctor's wife used to do some dressmaking, but her arthritis has gotten bad. And with more families settling, there's always need for children's clothes, wedding dresses, men's shirts that actually fit. She nodded decisively. Yes, a proper seamstress could do well here, especially one trained in a city establishment. That night, as Wilhelmina lay in the unfamiliar bed, listening to the foreign sounds of the frontier town, so different from Chicago's constant bustle, her mind turned to Preston Reed. There had been kindness in his eyes, yes, but something more. A loneliness that matched her own, perhaps, or a recognition of some sort, as if they were 2 planets that had unexpectedly found themselves in the same orbit. Foolishness, she whispered to herself. One did not develop fanciful notions about a man one had just met, especially when one's entire life had just been upended. Yet, as sleep finally claimed her, it was the cowboy's steady gaze and quiet promise that followed her into dreams. Morning arrived, with golden light streaming through the small window and the sounds of Mrs. Hoffman's chickens clucking below. For a moment, Wilhelmina lay disoriented before the previous day's events came rushing back. She rose quickly, determined to face whatever this new day might bring. After a breakfast of cornbread, eggs, and strong coffee shared with the other boarders, Wilhelmina helped Mrs. Hoffman with the morning chores, then dressed carefully in her second-best dress, a moss-green cotton with mother-of-pearl buttons that complemented her hazel eyes. She was just pinning her hair when a knock came at the front door downstairs. Mrs. Hoffman's voice carried up the stairwell. She'll be right down, Mr. Reed. Come in and have some coffee while you wait. Wilhelmina took a deep breath, checking her appearance one final time in the small mirror above the washstand. Forward, she whispered to herself, a habit from childhood when facing difficult situations. Always forward. Preston Reed stood when she entered the parlor, setting aside his coffee cup. He'd clearly made an effort with his appearance. His shirt was crisp, his hair neatly combed, and he'd trimmed his beard. Something about this touched Wilhelmina deeply. Good morning, Miss Kane, he greeted her. I trust you slept well? Quite well, thank you, Mr. Reed. I'm ready whenever you are. The morning air was cool and fresh as they stepped onto the boardwalk, though the cloudless sky promised heat later in the day. Silverwater Springs was coming to life around them, shopkeepers opening their doors, a wagon laden with lumber creaking past, children racing toward the small schoolhouse at the end of the street. It's a busy little town, Wilhelmina observed as they walked. Preston nodded. Growing steadily these past few years, the silver mines to the north brought the first wave. Then fertile grazing land kept folks here even after the easiest veins played out. He gestured toward the distant mountains. Still good deposits up there for those willing to work hard, but ranching and farming are the backbone now. And your ranch? What do you raise? Cattle mostly, about 200 head, some horses. Got a good spring that runs year-round, makes all the difference. Pride colored his voice when he spoke of his land. It's not the biggest spread, but it's good land, well managed. The sheriff's office was a solid brick building that also housed the jail, a single cell visible through a barred window at the back. Sheriff Daniels himself proved to be a graying man in his 50s, with a perpetually worried expression that eased somewhat when Preston introduced Wilhelmina and explained her situation. Wright's mail-order bride? Lord above, I never thought. He shook his head. Should have occurred to me he might have such arrangements in progress, but there wasn't a word of it among his papers. Is there anything left of his estate? Preston asked directly. The sheriff sighed. Not much. The homestead itself? 160 acres with a small cabin, barn in poor repair. About 30 head of cattle, though half are unbranded and disputed by the Barty Ranch. Some furniture, household goods. He looked at Wilhelmina apologetically. Land deed had a banknote against it. Once that's settled and other debts paid, there might be a small sum remaining, but I wouldn't count on much. Wilhelmina absorbed this information with as much dignity as she could muster. I understand. I had no expectations of inheritance, Sheriff Daniels. Mr. Wright and I had no formal contract, merely an agreement to marry upon my arrival. Still, the sheriff said, you came all this way on his invitation. Seems to me you're entitled to something. He rifled through some papers on his desk. Tell you what, I'll speak to Judge Harmon when he comes through next week. At the very least, we might get your travel expenses reimbursed from the estate. That's very kind, Sheriff, Wilhelmina said sincerely. As they left the sheriff's office, Preston was quiet, his brow furrowed in thought. They walked half a block before he spoke. Miss Kane, would you permit me to show you something? Curious, she nodded. Of course, Mr. Reed. He led her to the general store, nodding to the proprietor as they entered. Mrs. Thompson, this is Miss Kane. She's new to Silverwater Springs and is a trained seamstress from Chicago. The plump, pleasant-faced woman behind the counter brightened immediately. A seamstress? Well, isn't that providential? My eyes aren't what they used to be for close work, and these ready-mades need constant alteration. Preston smiled slightly. I thought you two should meet. Miss Kane is staying at Mrs. Hoffman's while she decides her next steps. Mrs. Thompson came around the counter, already warming to the idea. My dear, if you're looking for work, I have more mending than I can manage, and customers asking weekly if I know someone who can sew proper dresses and men's shirts. Hope flickered in Wilhelmina's chest. I would be most interested in discussing possibilities, Mrs. Thompson. I'm experienced with both ladies' and gentlemen's garments, as well as alterations and repairs. Wonderful. When could you start? I have a corner at the back that would make a fine workspace, good light from the window. I could begin tomorrow if that suits, Wilhelmina offered, almost dizzy with the sudden change in her prospects. As they worked out preliminary details, Preston stood quietly by, a small smile playing at his lips. When they finally exited the store, Wilhelmina turned to him, eyes bright with gratitude. Mr. Reed, I don't know how to thank you. That introduction may well have saved me. He shook his head, suddenly looking a bit self-conscious. No saving required, Miss Kane. Just neighbors helping neighbors. That's how we survive out here. He paused, then added, I meant what I said yesterday. You won't stand alone here. Their eyes met and something unspoken passed between them, a recognition perhaps of kindred spirits. The moment stretched, warm and promising, until the rattle of a passing wagon broke the spell. Preston cleared his throat. I should mention I'm hosting a barn raising this Saturday at my ranch. New storage for winter hay. Most folks from town will be there. Good chance for you to meet people. There's always a dinner after. You'd be most welcome. I would like that very much, Wilhelmina said softly. Good. That's good. He shifted his weight, suddenly awkward in a way that was entirely endearing. Well, I should let you get back to Mrs. Hoffman's. I imagine you have settling in to do. Indeed. She hesitated, then offered, "Perhaps you might point out your ranch to me sometime. I've never seen a proper cattle operation." Something like pleasure flickered across his face. "I'd be honored to show you around any time. It's about 5 miles north, along Cottonwood Creek." They parted with the promise to see each other at church on Sunday, if not before. As Wilhelmina walked back to the boarding house, she found herself smiling. Her situation remained precarious, but no longer felt hopeless. In the space of a morning, she had potential employment and the beginnings of a social circle. And Preston Reed. Well, she wasn't quite ready to examine the flutter in her chest when she thought of the quiet rancher. The next few days passed in a blur of activity. Wilhelmina began work at Thompson's General Store, quickly proving her worth by expertly altering a wedding dress for the banker's daughter and creating a pattern for men's shirts that actually accommodated the broader shoulders of frontier men. Word spread, and by week's end, she had orders that would keep her busy for a fortnight. Mrs. Hoffman, delighted by her boarder's success, offered to reduce the room rate further in exchange for Wilhelmina teaching her some finer sewing techniques. "These old hands can still learn new tricks," she declared, peering through spectacles at a delicate French seam Wilhelmina demonstrated. Through it all, Preston Reed was a steady presence. He didn't call daily. His ranch demanded too much of his time, but he found reasons to visit town more often than usual. One day he brought her a small bouquet of wildflowers that reminded me of the color of your dress. Another time, he arrived with fresh churned butter from his spring house, because Mrs. Hoffman mentioned you missed having it on your bread. Each thoughtful gesture revealed a man of depth and consideration beneath the stoic exterior. During their conversations, Wilhelmina discovered his love of reading. He had a small but cherished library inherited from his father, his quiet wit, and his deep connection to the land he worked. In turn, she shared stories of her childhood in Pennsylvania, her move to Chicago after her parents' death from typhoid when she was 18, and her years working for Madame Leclerc's fine apparel. He listened attentively, never interrupting, his eyes warm with interest. "Why did you answer Thomas Wright's advertisement?" he asked her one evening as they sat on Mrs. Hoffman's front porch. The question was direct but not unkind. Wilhelmina considered before answering. "Practicality, in part. A seamstress makes a decent living, but not enough to ever own property or secure a real future in Chicago." She gazed at the sunset painting the distant mountains gold and crimson. "But also, I wanted something different, something real. The city is all surface and show. I thought perhaps out here, life might be harder but more authentic." Preston nodded slowly. "That's well said. It is harder. But yes, more real." He looked at her, his expression thoughtful. "Most women who come as mail-order brides are running from something, or desperate. You don't strike me as either." "No," she agreed, "not desperate. Determined, perhaps." By the time Saturday arrived, the day of the barn raising, Wilhelmina had begun to feel a tentative sense of belonging in Silverwater Springs. Mrs. Thompson had already increased her pay based on the orders flooding in, and Mrs. Hoffman declared her family, not just a boarder. But it was the prospect of seeing Preston's ranch that had her awake before dawn, carefully selecting her most practical dress, a sturdy blue cotton that could withstand dust and work, yet still pinning her hair with extra care. Mrs. Hoffman gave her a knowing look over breakfast, but said nothing beyond offering the loan of a wide-brimmed hat to keep that fair skin from burning. Preston arrived at 8 o'clock with a wagon to transport Mrs. Hoffman, Wilhelmina, and several other townsfolk to his ranch. His face lit up when he saw Wilhelmina waiting on the porch, and she felt an answering warmth spread through her chest. "You look lovely this morning, Miss Kane," he said quietly as he helped her onto the wagon seat. "Thank you, Mr. Reed. I'm quite looking forward to seeing your home." The 5-mile journey passed pleasantly, with Mrs. Hoffman and the others chatting animatedly while Preston pointed out landmarks to Wilhelmina, a distinctive rock formation, the creek that bordered his property, a stand of cottonwoods where his father had built the original cabin. As they crested a small rise, the Reed Ranch came into view. A neat white farmhouse stood on a gentle slope, with a barn and several outbuildings arranged nearby. Pastures stretched in every direction, dotted with grazing cattle. A creek wound through the property, its banks lined with willows and cottonwoods that provided welcome shade. It's beautiful, Wilhelmina breathed, taking in the peaceful scene. Preston's expression softened with pride and pleasure. Thank you. It's taken years of work, but it's becoming what my father envisioned. Already, other wagons were arriving, families from neighboring ranches and farms, more townsfolk coming to help with the raising. By mid-morning, nearly 40 people had gathered, the men organizing into work crews while women set up tables for the feast that would follow. Wilhelmina found herself welcomed warmly, introduced around by Mrs. Hoffman and Mrs. Thompson as our new seamstress with the magic fingers. She was immediately put to work helping prepare food, but often found her gaze drawn to where Preston directed the barn raising with quiet authority. There was something magnificent about watching the men work together, lifting heavy timbers into place, hammering, calling instructions to one another. Preston moved among them, sometimes taking the heaviest lifting himself, other times stepping back to ensure the structure was coming together properly. Sweat darkened his shirt as the sun climbed higher, and he'd rolled his sleeves to reveal corded forearms bronzed by the sun. Several times he glanced her way, once catching her watching him. Instead of looking away embarrassed, Wilhelmina smiled and was rewarded with a grin that transformed his serious face. "He looks at you like a man dying of thirst looks at water," observed a voice beside her. Wilhelmina turned to find a young woman about her own age, heavily pregnant, smiling knowingly. "I'm Sarah Jenkins," the woman introduced herself. "My husband Daniel's up there trying to prove he's as strong as two men, despite me telling him not to strain himself with the baby coming." "Wilhelmina Kane," she replied, liking the young woman immediately. "I'm pleased to meet you." Sarah nodded toward Preston. "I grew up next to the Reeds." Preston was always the serious one, even as a boy. Responsible, steady, her expression grew wistful. After his brother Caleb died, though, something in him just closed off, started working dawn to dusk, rarely socializing. This is the first barn raising or gathering of any kind he's hosted in 2 years. Wilhelmina absorbed this information, watching as Preston laughed at something another man said, his face momentarily carefree. "He seems to be enjoying today," she observed. "Yes," Sarah agreed meaningfully. "He does." By mid-afternoon, the frame of the new barn stood complete. A cheer went up as the last major beam was secured and the men climbed down, dusty and triumphant. The feast began in earnest, tables groaning with fried chicken, hams, potato salads, cornbread, and every manner of pie and cake. Preston made his way to where Wilhelmina was helping serve, his face flushed with exertion and satisfaction. "Miss Kane," he greeted her, "I hope you're enjoying the day." "Very much, Mr. Reed. Your land is even more beautiful than I imagined, and your neighbors are wonderfully welcoming." He smiled, reaching for a cup of lemonade she offered. Their fingers brushed and neither pulled away immediately. "Would you like a tour of the house? It's nothing grand, but I'm rather proud of the improvements I've made." "I'd be delighted." As they walked toward the farmhouse, several knowing glances followed them, but Wilhelmina found she didn't mind. There was something undeniably right about walking beside Preston across the land he loved. The house was indeed modest, but well-built and meticulously maintained. A central living area featured a stone fireplace and comfortable furniture, while a dining room and kitchen completed the first floor. Preston showed her his small library, a corner of the living room with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with carefully preserved volumes. "My mother taught school before she married," he explained, running a finger along the spines. "She believed education was the greatest gift she could give us, even out here." "She sounds like a remarkable woman." She was. His voice softened with memory. "She'd have liked you, I think. Your determination. Your grace under difficult circumstances." The personal nature of the comment hung in the air between them, intimate and revealing. Wilhelmina felt her cheeks warm. "May I ask you something, Mr. Reed?" "Anything. Why did you come to my aid that first day? You could have simply walked past like everyone else." Preston considered the question seriously. "Partly because it was the right thing to do, but also—" He hesitated, then met her eyes directly. "I recognized something in you, a strength, despite your situation, and yes, a loneliness that matched my own." He gave a small, self-deprecating smile. That sounds presumptuous, I know. No, she said softly. Not presumptuous. Perceptive. They stood there, something unspoken but powerful building between them, until a call from outside announced that music was starting. The remainder of the afternoon and evening passed in a haze of food, conversation, and dancing as fiddles and guitars were produced. Preston proved to be a capable dancer, guiding Wilhelmina through reels and waltzes with the same quiet confidence he showed in everything. With each dance, they stood a little closer, spoke a little more freely, laughed a little more easily. As twilight descended, lanterns were lit, casting golden pools of light across the yard where couples continued to dance. Preston led Wilhelmina away from the bustle, toward a bench beneath one of the old cottonwoods. Are you tired? We could rejoin the others if you prefer, he offered. No, this is lovely, she assured him, grateful for the relative quiet. It's been a wonderful day, Preston. It was the first time she'd used his given name, and it felt right. He noticed, his eyes warming. Wilhelmina, he said her name carefully, as if tasting it. May I call you that? Please do. They sat in companionable silence for a moment, watching fireflies begin to rise from the grass nearby. The music from the yard drifted to them, softened by distance. I have a confession, Preston said finally. When I saw you standing alone at the stagecoach stop that first day, before I even knew who you were waiting for or why, something told me you were important, that you would matter. Wilhelmina's heart quickened. And now? Now I know you matter. To the town, becoming part of the community so quickly, to the people who depend on your skills. He turned to face her fully. To me. The directness of his gaze made her breath catch. Preston. I know it's soon, he continued, his voice low and earnest. Too soon, perhaps. You came here expecting to marry one man and found yourself stranded. The last thing you need is another man presuming upon your situation. Is that what you think you're doing, presuming? He shook his head. No, at least, I hope not. What I'm trying to say, poorly, is that I care for you, Wilhelmina. These past days, getting to know you, seeing your courage and grace, I find myself thinking of you constantly. Joy bloomed in her chest, bright and unexpected. I think of you too, she admitted, far more than is probably proper. A smile spread across his face, transforming it. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, he reached for her hand. His palm was warm and calloused against hers, the touch sending a pleasant shiver up her arm. I'm not asking for any promises, he said, only the chance to court you properly, to see if what I feel, what I hope we both feel, might grow into something lasting. Wilhelmina looked at their joined hands, then up at his hopeful expression. In that moment, the pain and uncertainty of the past weeks seemed to recede, replaced by a tentative but powerful sense of possibility. I would like that very much, she whispered. His smile was like the sunrise. Slowly, he raised her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. Then may I have the honor of escorting you to church tomorrow, Miss Kane? She laughed, the sound bright with happiness. The honor would be mine, Mr. Reed. The weeks that followed took on a golden quality in Wilhelmina's memory, each day bringing new experiences, new connections, and deepening feelings. Preston courted her with unwavering attention and respect, calling at Mrs. Hoffman's when his work allowed, bringing small gifts that showed he listened to her preferences, a ribbon the exact shade of her favorite dress, a book of poetry she'd mentioned loving as a girl. On Sundays, they attended church together, drawing approving nods from the townsfolk who had quickly accepted their courtship as natural and right. Afterward, he would take her for drives in his buggy, showing her the beauty of the territory-hidden waterfalls, valleys carpeted with wildflowers, rocky outcrops that offered views for miles. During one such outing in late May, they picnicked beside Cottonwood Creek where it ran through Preston's property. The day was warm, the grass soft beneath the blanket he'd spread, and Wilhelmina felt a contentment she'd never known before. I received a letter from Sheriff Daniels yesterday, she mentioned as they shared fresh bread, cheese, and apple pie Mrs. Hoffman had packed for them. The judge awarded me a small settlement from Thomas Wright's estate, enough to cover my travel expenses and a bit more. Preston nodded approvingly. That's good news. though you've certainly established yourself well without it." It was true. Her seamstress business had flourished beyond expectation. Mrs. Thompson had formally hired her with a generous arrangement, a percentage of all sewing work, plus a small salary for managing fabric and notions inventory. She'd even taken on an apprentice, a 16-year-old girl with nimble fingers and a good eye. "Yes, it's more security than restitution at this point," Wilhelmina agreed. "But I'm glad to have the matter settled." Preston was quiet for a moment, breaking a blade of grass between his fingers. "Does it feel strange that you came here to marry one man and now I'm being courted by another?" she finished when he trailed off. "No, not strange. I never met Thomas Wright. Our arrangement was practical rather than romantic." She looked at Preston directly. "This is different." Relief and something deeper softened his expression. "Very different," he agreed. He shifted closer, his shoulder brushing hers. They had shared kisses in recent weeks, tender, increasingly passionate moments that left Wilhelmina breathless and yearning. Now, as his hand came up to cup her cheek, she leaned into his touch without hesitation. "Wilhelmina," he murmured, his voice husky, "I find myself unable to imagine my life without you in it." Her heart swelled. "Nor I without you." His kiss was gentle at first, then deepening with a hunger that matched her own. His arms encircled her, strong and sure, and she wound her fingers into his hair, reveling in the freedom to touch him, to hold him close. When they finally parted, both breathing quickly, his eyes were dark with emotion. "I love you," he said simply. "I have almost from the beginning, though I scarcely dared admit it to myself." Tears of joy stung her eyes. "And I love you, Preston Reed, with all my heart." He took both her hands in his expression solemn yet joyful. "Then will you do me the very great honor of becoming my wife, of making this ranch our home, of building a life together?" "Yes," she answered without hesitation. "Oh, yes." His whoop of joy startled birds from a nearby tree, and then he was lifting her, spinning her around as she laughed, dizzy with happiness. When he set her down, he kissed her again, sealing their promise. "We can marry whenever you wish," he said. "I know traditional engagements are longer, but 2 weeks," she interrupted decisively. "I see no reason to wait when we're both certain." His smile was radiant. 2 weeks it is, though you might want to consult with Reverend Hollis to be sure the church is available. And I'll need to make a wedding dress," she added practically. "Nothing elaborate, but whatever you desire," he assured her, "though you would be beautiful in sackcloth." She laughed, swatting his arm playfully. "Fortunately for us both, I have access to much finer fabrics." As they packed up their picnic, plans flowing easily between them, Wilhelmina marveled at the turn her life had taken. 6 weeks ago she had stood abandoned and alone on the platform of Silverwater Springs. Now she was deeply in love, engaged to a good man, with work she enjoyed and a community that had embraced her. The wedding preparations passed in a blur of activity. Mrs. Hoffman insisted on hosting a dinner for the engagement announcement, where the entire town seemed to turn out to congratulate them. Sarah Jenkins organized a quilting bee, where the ladies of Silverwater Springs created a wedding quilt as a gift, each square representing a family's good wishes. Wilhelmina worked evenings on her wedding dress, a creation of ivory silk with delicate lace trim she'd saved for something special. Simple but elegant, like the life she was choosing. Preston, meanwhile, threw himself into preparing their home. He repainted the bedroom and parlor, built new shelves in the kitchen to Wilhelmina's specifications, and ordered a new mattress and bedding from the catalog. "I want everything to be perfect for you," he told her when she protested that such changes weren't necessary. "It will be perfect because it's ours," she assured him, "but I do appreciate the fresh paint." The wedding day dawned clear and mild, June 12, 1876. Wilhelmina woke early, too excited to sleep, and watched the sunrise from her window at Mrs. Hoffman's, knowing it was the last morning she would wake in this room. Mrs. Hoffman and several other women arrived to help her prepare, bringing flowers for her hair and something borrowed, a delicate pearl pendant that had belonged to Mrs. Thompson's mother. "Every bride should have pearls," the shopkeeper declared, fastening it around Wilhelmina's neck. When she finally stood ready, the women stepped back with murmurs of approval. The ivory dress fit perfectly, highlighting her slender waist and falling in soft folds to the floor. Her honey-blonde hair was arranged in an elegant knot with a few curls framing her face, and wildflowers were woven through the coil at the back. "You look radiant, my dear," Mrs. Hoffman said, uncharacteristically emotional. "Preston Reed is a fortunate man indeed." The small church was filled to capacity when Wilhelmina arrived. Sheriff Daniels had offered to escort her down the aisle in the absence of family, an offer she'd gratefully accepted. "Ready, Miss Kane?" he asked as they paused at the church doors. "Or should I say, the future Mrs. Reed?" She smiled, serene in her certainty. "More than ready, Sheriff." The simple melody of Amazing Grace played on the church's small organ as the doors opened. Wilhelmina's eyes immediately found Preston, standing tall and handsome at the altar in a new black suit. His face, when he saw her, transformed with such naked love and admiration that tears pricked her eyes. Each step toward him felt right, inevitable. When Sheriff Daniels placed her hand in Preston's, the connection was electric, grounding her in the moment. "You are breathtaking," Preston whispered for her ears alone. Reverend Hollis welcomed the congregation and spoke briefly about the nature of marriage, a partnership of equals, a journey undertaken together through all life's joys and sorrows. Wilhelmina and Preston had chosen traditional vows, but as they repeated the ancient promises, the words felt new and deeply personal. "I, Preston James Reed, take thee, Wilhelmina Grace Kane, to be my wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part." His voice was steady and sure, his eyes never leaving hers as he spoke each word with profound sincerity. When it was her turn, Wilhelmina's voice quavered slightly with emotion, but grew stronger with each promise made. They exchanged rings, simple gold bands that Preston had ordered from Denver. As he slipped the ring onto her finger, his hand was warm and steady, his touch a promise in itself. "By the authority vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Hollis declared. "What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." He smiled at Preston. "You may kiss your bride." Preston's kiss was gentle, but filled with promise, appropriate for the setting yet hinting at the passion they would share in private. When they turned to face the congregation as Mr. and Mrs. Reed, the church erupted in cheers and applause. The celebration that followed at the Reed Ranch was joyous and relaxed, tables set up under the cottonwoods, lanterns strung from branches, music and laughter filling the air. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in spectacular hues of orange and pink, Preston led Wilhelmina in their first dance as husband and wife. "Happy, Mrs. Reed?" he murmured as they swayed together. "Completely," she answered, nestling closer in his arms. "And you?" "More than I ever thought possible." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "When I saw you standing alone that day, I made you a promise. Do you remember?" She nodded against his shoulder. "You said I wouldn't stand alone again." "And I meant it. For all our days, Wilhelmina, you'll never stand alone again." As darkness fell and the celebration continued around them, Preston led his bride toward their home, now illuminated with welcoming lamplight in the windows. At the threshold, he paused, then swept her into his arms. "Welcome home, Mrs. Reed," he said softly, carrying her across the threshold. Wilhelmina wound her arms around his neck, her heart full to bursting with love and gratitude for the twist of fate that had brought her to Silverwater Springs and into the arms of this remarkable man. "Home," she whispered against his lips, "at last." 5 years later, Wilhelmina stood on the front porch of the Reed Ranch house, watching as Preston led their 3-year-old daughter Emma on her pony around the yard. The little girl's laughter rang out as clear as a bell as she bounced in the small saddle, her father's steady hand ensuring she wouldn't fall. "Mama, look, I'm riding like Papa," Emma called, her copper-colored curls so like her father's, escaping from beneath her small hat. "I see you, my brave girl," Wilhelmina called back, one hand resting on her swollen belly where their second child grew, due in just 2 months' time. The ranch had prospered under their joint stewardship. Preston's cattle herd had nearly doubled, and they'd added sheep the previous year, Wilhelmina's suggestion, after noticing the increasing demand for wool among her seamstress clients. The original barn raising had been followed by 2 more as they expanded operations, and 4 hired hands now lived in a bunkhouse near the main barn. Wilhelmina had maintained her connection with Thompson's general store, though now she worked primarily from home, creating patterns and handling special orders while training 2 young women from town as apprentices. Her reputation had spread throughout the territory, and she occasionally received commissions from as far away as Denver. Silverwater Springs itself had grown considerably. The railroad spur line had indeed come through, bringing increased trade and new settlers. A proper hotel had been built, along with a bank, a second church, and even a small hospital where Dr. Miller now delivered most of the town's babies, though Wilhelmina had insisted that Preston fetch Mrs. Hoffman when Emma was born, trusting the older woman's experienced hands. "Thinking deep thoughts, love?" Preston asked, approaching with Emma now perched on his shoulders, her small hands buried in his hair. "Just counting my blessings," Wilhelmina replied, smiling up at her husband and daughter. Preston set Emma down gently. "Why don't you go see if Mrs. Guthrie has those cookies ready?" he suggested, referring to their housekeeper who came in 3 days a week. "Tell her you can have one before supper if she says it's all right." As the little girl scampered off, Preston stepped close to Wilhelmina, drawing her into his arms as best he could with her pregnancy between them. "And are there many blessings to count?" She leaned into his embrace, still marveling after 5 years at how perfectly she fit against him. "Too many to name, but they begin and end with you." His kiss was as tender as the first they'd shared, yet deepened by years of love and shared experiences. When they parted, he rested his forehead against hers. "Do you ever think about that day, when you arrived and no one was there to meet you?" "Sometimes," she admitted. "Less often now, but I'm grateful in a strange way. If Thomas Wright had met me as planned, I would never have known you, never had this life, this love." Preston nodded thoughtfully. "I've thought the same. It seems wrong to be grateful for another man's passing, and yet it brought us together," she finished for him. "I believe there's purpose in such things, even when we can't see it at the time." He placed a gentle hand on her belly, smiling as he felt their child kick vigorously against his palm. Strong, like his mother. "Or her father," Wilhelmina countered with a smile. They had chosen not to decide on names until the baby arrived, enjoying the speculation. From inside the house came the sound of Emma giggling, followed by Mrs. Guthrie's warm laugh. The sun was beginning its descent toward the western mountains, bathing the ranch in golden light. A gentle breeze stirred the leaves of the cottonwoods, carrying the scent of summer grass and distant rain. "We should go in soon," Preston said, though he made no move to release her. "Supper will be ready." Wilhelmina nodded but stayed within the circle of his arms, savoring the moment. "I love you, Preston Reed," she said softly. "More with each passing day." His eyes, the same striking blue that had first caught her attention on that fateful day at the stagecoach stop, filled with answering love. "And I you, Wilhelmina Reed. Beyond measure, beyond words." As they turned toward their home, hands linked, Wilhelmina reflected on the journey that had brought her to this place, the fear and uncertainty of that first day, standing alone on a dusty platform with nothing but hope to sustain her. And then Preston, with his quiet strength and steadfast heart, promising that she wouldn't stand alone again. It was a promise he had kept in ways neither of them could have imagined, not just in the practical sense of marriage and family, but in the deeper joining of 2 souls who had recognized in each other the missing piece of themselves. "Mama, Papa." "Cookies?" Emma called from the doorway, her face alight with the simple joy of childhood. Preston laughed, squeezing Wilhelmina's hand. "Duty calls, Mrs. Reed." "Indeed it does, Mr. Reed," she smiled up at him, heart full. "And what a beautiful duty it is." Together they walked toward their daughter and the warmth of their home, stepping once more into the life they had built, a life founded on a chance meeting, nurtured through respect and kindness, and transformed by love into something neither had dared to dream possible. The mail-order bride, who had been met by no one, had found her place at last, standing beside the man who had promised she would never stand alone again. and in that promise kept, they had both found everything.